Trump doubles down on election integrity as the midterms loom over the Republicans. Marco Rubio diagnoses the left, and Governor Walz defends the indefensible. I'm Keisha Derry, constitutional lawyer, warrior for Jesus Christ, and political junkie. Thanks for joining me today. Well, I'm still going through those election files that Donald Trump and his administration released, and that pretty bombshell speech he issued not long ago. Now, what I would like to really start with is saying the media isn't helping the situation. They're doing a lot of gaslighting right now, and even if you don't believe what he's saying, I think the media in this situation should summarize the documents for the public in their entirety and give people summaries, because a lot of people are not going to go through all these documents and read them. There are a lot of them. Let people make up their own minds, and it seems like the media is not interested in doing that. Many of them did not air the speech. I don't know what justification there is for not airing the speech. You don't have to agree with them, but keeping the information from the public makes you look like you have something to hide. So let people see the speech, let people know what's in the documents, and let people make up their own minds. Pretty much that simple. But all of this really is about the Save America Act. Donald Trump is really going hard after this and really wants this passed before the midterms. But the Republicans are definitely struggling. The House has passed this bill 3 times, and it's the Senate where every time it goes there, it's just completely blocked. Again, what is in the Save America Act? Well, proof of citizenship to register to vote, approved ID to actually cast your ballot. It requires states to purge their voter rolls every 30 days. And as far as mail-in ballots, a lot of people say there are heavy restrictions or barely allows it. That's not quite true. You get mail-in ballots for illness, disability, military travel. And I don't really know why that's a problem. I think paper ballots and casting ballots in person is probably going to be the most secure way to make sure your elections are safe and they have integrity. But this bill does also add some things that are not related to elections at all. So, for example, it restricts transgender identifying people from participating in sports, meaning men can't participate in girls' sports, which I hope fully support. And then it also bans any sort of like medical sex change surgery or medicine for children at all, which has nothing to do with the bill. So there's, in my opinion, the GOP right now is considering a slimmed down version of the bill where it's just kind of clean, talking about proof of citizenship and voter ID. But frankly, that doesn't seem like the provisions that the Democrats are worried about. They don't seem to be worried about the transgender aspects of this bill. The thing the Democrats seem most focused on is this photo ID situation and this proof of citizenship, which is bizarre because you're not supposed to vote if you're not a citizen. And there's no reason why a US citizen can't get an ID. So at this point, the Republicans are trying yet another plan, and they're adding portions of the Save America Act to a budget bill because it only requires a simple majority. And the Republicans control both the House and the Senate right now. And that particular budget bill is in House committee. So it's got a little ways to go. What the Republicans did with this bill is they limited the certain provisions, very, very slim provisions of the Save America Act, and they're attaching it to, say, monetary incentives for states, like grants that agree, states that agree to abide by these restrictions basically will get some grants for it. And many of the Republicans have said that if states don't agree, then they will not receive the election reimbursements that states typically receive after national elections from the federal government. So it's a very different approach. It's very similar to the approach that you've seen Democrats and Republicans take when they want to do something and the other side is not allowing it, and then they attach it to a budget bill. And when you do that, the chances of a funding problem go up and a government shutdown. It can happen in those circumstances. But this whole thing is a little bit bizarre to me. I don't understand why the Democrats are going so hard against this. I don't know if they're doing this just because it's a Trump proposal or if there is something else going on here. 80% of Americans agree with voter ID laws. This is not a controversial subject at all. So why won't the Dems vote for this? I can't figure it out. Many of the Republicans think it's because Democrats know that they are cheating and allowing people to vote that shouldn't be voting, and this will put the kibosh on that. But I will say this, a lot of Republicans are calling to nuke the filibuster, including Donald Trump. I don't like the idea of getting rid of the filibuster. As a constitutional lawyer, it is such an important mechanism for both sides. And I do believe that when you have a controversial bill, you should have to get the 60 votes. That means a lot of times you're going to have to reach across the aisle and get other people to agree and cross sides. And I think it's an important process when you're a congressperson. But voter ID is not controversial. 80% of Americans agree with it, and the Democrats are not following the voters on this issue. So I don't know. The Republicans are definitely looking at a tense situation here because, generally speaking, the party that is in power typically loses the midterms. And I think the Republicans are trying desperately not to get to that place. But the bottom line is only American citizens should be weighing in on what happens in American government. But the GOP is running out of time before the crucial midterms. So we'll have to see what they choose to do. It should be an interesting fight the next couple of months. All right. Now, a lot of clips about this have been going around. Marco Rubio gave a speech at the Ministerial on the Resurgence of Political Terrorism. It was sponsored by the State Department, obviously Marco Rubio's department. And he invited leaders from all over the globe to talk about violence on the left and really liking that violence to the global jihad and the fact that many global leaders had to come together to fight against that threat, that terroristic threat, which he says now is happening with the left. And he talked about Antifa militants and how many people are giving leftists permission for this kind of violence because the left uses the tactic of sort of couching its terror in civil liberty, which I can tell you is very true. I definitely agree with him on this. And this kind of violence is often treated as a myth, he says, in media and academia and government. He points out that during the George Floyd riots, when, during the day there may have been protests where people were just carrying signs and saying and, talking about how they felt. But a lot of times that was quickly overshadowed by leftists who, in my opinion, don't have any cause. I don't think they care about anything. And Marco Rubio kind of points to this. And many governments refuse to prosecute the people who were destroying buildings and engaging in some pretty severe violence. There's one moment when a news anchor was in flames on camera, and underneath the media is calling the protests mostly peaceful. So I don't know what it is where people don't want to acknowledge what's going on here. Perhaps, it's because the Democrats have really embraced this group. And I think to their own detriment, because I don't think these people are Democrats or Republicans. I don't think they care about much. But anyhow, we should look at some of what Marco Rubio said here because it is amazing. And these clips are flying all over the place for good reason, because he really does point out some really important elements of this sort of radical left. He says they have a poisonous resentment cloaked in the language of equality, justice, and liberation. And I know it well because I've been fighting in litigation against this group a long time. And many of the Democrats who are covering them, protecting them, refusing to prosecute them when they engage in ridiculous amounts of violence. Let's check out what Marco Rubio had to say about that.
Here in the United States, the share of left-wing terrorist attacks and plots has risen to levels not seen in decades. In Germany, far-left violence has jumped by more than 40%, in just the last year alone. In Greece, more than 80% of radical violence is now driven by far-left and anarchist actors. These are not abstract statistics. Americans have seen what those numbers mean. An all-out assault on our immigration officers, sniper attacks, explosives, armed ambushes, a transgender shooter opening fire on Catholic elementary school students as they pray, his gun marked with slogans like, "Where is your God now?" A healthcare executive executed in cold blood in the streets. Multiple assassination attempts on a sitting president, and the murder of the greatest conservative activist of a generation, a man who happened to also be a husband and the father of 2 young children, shot and killed while speaking to a crowd of students. This is a distinctive and unique evil. It has always been driven by a hatred, above all else, a hatred for civilization itself. It is a revolt of the worst against the best, a revolt of the weak and the cowardly against the strong and the good. It is perpetrated by those who cannot build, who cannot create, who cannot achieve great things, and take their revenge upon the world for their own inadequacy by seeking to destroy those who can.
Very powerful words from Marco Rubio. You heard him talking about the Catholic school and the idea that, sometimes these leftists will go so far. Who opens fire on Catholic school children while they are praying? Someone who is completely debaucherous, just hating God. And that's one of the things he says later. He says that above all else, communism is a world without God. And that's really what the leftists are about. They will justify anything in honor of their feelings. And I think that's why they've so closely aligned with the Democrats, because the Democrats have, in a lot of ways, eliminated God from their platform and instead put feelings on the throne. And whenever your feelings are on the throne, there really isn't going to be anything that is everything goes, essentially, when your feelings are your God. Anything that interferes with your feelings has to go. And that includes people that tell you that you shouldn't be listening to your feelings all the time. I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. Okay. I want you to, Governor Tim Walz, okay, has really defended the indefensible at this point. He has allowed an immigrant who sexually assaulted a 10-year-old. He was on a board, voted to pardon that man. That conviction had already was come and gone. And the reason that vote went through was so that the United States could not deport this man. Now, why wouldn't you want the United States to deport a man who did something like that? I don't know why you wouldn't, but let's take a look at this, because this is interesting.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is facing intense criticism after defending his decision to pardon a Laotian man convicted of sexually assaulting a child, just days after the Trump administration deported him to Laos. According to federal officials, he lost his legal immigration status after the conviction and was placed under a final order of removal. Defending the pardon, Walz argued that the decision was not about immigration policy. He questioned whether deporting Vang actually made communities safer and said the board evaluates every clemency application on its own merits.
Did that make us any safer? Did that make the children that are left behind any more stable? Did it improve the idea that we can't all be judged by our worst day?
All right. So that's crazy. I don't know why you would defend this. What do you mean it doesn't make people safer? Obviously, it makes people safer to deport someone who thinks it's okay to have sex with kids. That's not a thing you justify. But see, this is what happens because we're dealing with a group of people in a lot of ways that doesn't want to put anything over their feelings. Anything they want, they should be able to have, and we shouldn't get in the way. And many times, these people, Governor Walz, for example, I think a lot of his actions here may have been motivated by the fact that he didn't want to be seen as cooperating with the Trump administration. But there are just some things you do not tolerate. And this is one of them. You do not allow these kinds of things to happen if you're a leader of a state. But then again, that's what happens when you align yourself with the radical left. And this is the worst aspect of this group, because when you resent God, this is who you become. Nothing is off limits when you resent God. And a lot of times you want to target the innocent. You want to target the things that are most pure and the things that most reveal God's truth. And children have that essence. And so this is why many of your just most disgusting predators will do that, just to spit in the face of God. And no matter what side you're on, whether Democrat or Republican, you should never, ever align yourself with something like that. There is a scene in The Dark Knight, one of my favorite action movies, where Bruce Wayne is struggling to understand the Joker's motives. He doesn't understand what makes this guy tick and what he wants. And Alfred Pennyworth, who is Bruce Wayne's loyal butler and in many ways his patriarch, he says to him, because some men aren't looking for anything logical like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn. And that's what's happening here. That's who these people are in many ways. There was another leader who spoke during Marco Rubio's the resurgence, the ministerial on the resurgence of political terrorism that same day. The same event. Another one of the leaders, I think it may have been Scott Bessent. I'm not sure exactly who said this, but basically said that the leftist justifies its violence by saying that he alone are the arbiter of what is right or wrong, not the law, not history, not civilization, and certainly not God. He also says that leftists envy moral superiority. And in a way, there's a part of me that agrees with what he's saying. And I think it's more than just moral of envy. It's a disdain for something, anything godly, anything pure. And I also think that's why many leftists entice celebrities and successful corporate executives and elites, because they too wrestle with the same moral envy, the same moral problem, the same desire for what Marco Rubio says is a world without God. But I don't think it's any wonder that we face this threat on America's 250th anniversary. There is bound to be opposition as America continues to forge forward as the greatest nation on the planet. And in this next phase, we may need to ratchet up the battle for continued freedom. This country was, in fact, founded on the principles of the Bible. And because of that, we may have to constantly rage against people who hate the Bible, who hate God and everything they stand for. But again, these people are not Democrats or Republicans. They don't believe that what both sides believe, that they are supposed to sharpen the republic, by criticizing, by making things better. They don't simply criticize America with a desire to make it better. They don't feel that way. They hate it. And they want to destroy it completely because they believe in nothing. God warns us about people with this mindset. In Romans 1:28-32, this is the NIV version. Furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind, so that they do what ought not to be done. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossipers, slanderers, God haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. Although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but also approve of those who practice them. In our continued quest to champion who we are as Americans and continue to live as Christians in this amazing country, I think it's important that we remember that the Christians' counterterrorism is the gospel. Thanks for joining me today. See you soon.